A warm welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week we'll be reviewing the just concluded Global Business Forum for Africa, which held in Dubai. Joining me will be Chief Executive Officer, Cowrie Asset Management Limited, Johnson Chukwu, on the gains of the summit. Later, as the White House reveals the date in which the United States will finally reopen its borders to vaccinated travelers from around the world, we'll be discussing what that would mean for international travelers and the new protocols for travel from that date. That's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. Let's check in on other discussions in diplomatic circles, and we'll be right back. Nigeria's Consul General to Shanghai, Mr. Chimezie Ogu, has called for more investment by China on the African continent to achieve win-win situations. He made the call during the Jiangsu Africa Cooperation Conference and China-Africa Local Government Cooperation Forum. He described Africa as China's reliable friend and partner with tremendous cooperation on both sides, and that the continent had a lot to benefit within the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. Nigeria's ambassador to Spain, Mr. Demola Seriki, has been appointed permanent representative of Nigeria to the UN's World Tourism Organization in Madrid. Accepting his additional role, Mr. Seriki said he was very enthusiastic and passionate about the business of culture and tourism at global level. The Nigerian politician, teacher, businessman and public administrator was appointed ambassador to the Kingdom of Spain in January 2021. Russia and China have been holding naval exercises in the Sea of Japan, which ended over the weekend. It featured Russia's Pacific fleet, including an anti-submarine ship, corvettes, minesweepers, and a missile boat. The drill featured 12 planes and helicopters. Russia said the two countries started to hold naval drills in 2005. In 2020, the exercises were cancelled due to the pandemic. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has paid a farewell visit to Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan in Istanbul. The staunch European is due to step down after 16 years as German Chancellor as soon as a new government is formed. Following an inconclusive September 26th election, Germany's Social Democrats are courting smaller parties to form a coalition that would replace a conservative grouping led by Merkel's Christian Democrats. The UN General Assembly has elected the United States to the Geneva-based Human Rights Council more than 3 years after the Trump administration quit the 47-member body over what he called chronic bias against Israel and a lack of reform. The United States, which was unopposed, received 168 votes in the secret ballot by the 193-member General Assembly. It brings a 3-year term on January 1st, pitting Washington against Beijing and Moscow, who began council terms this year. The dates were October 13th and 14th, 2021. The venue was Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, and the host was the Dubai Chamber of Commerce. It was the first global event on Africa post-COVID with the theme Reset, Restore, Renew. The focus was Africa, as delegates from 55 countries discussed Africa's economic potential, which is in need of capital. They also agreed that platforms like the Global Business Forum Africa will enable the continent's power players to make the right connections and networks, as will the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement.
A platform like this, I believe, would enable us make the right connections, build the right networks, try and sell our continent and country better, to try and attract investment into Africa.
International partners need to start looking at Africa as blocks, right? So if you have, say, country X trading in 3 or 4 countries at the same time, and they're able to create synergy across those countries, it creates for a much, much better value for position from an investment perspective, and also for them to actually benefit from the continent versus trading with silos countries.
On day 2 of the forum, discussions centered around resilience of African economies and opportunities rising in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The pandemic is becoming more manageable. Travel and commerce are beginning to recover. However, we are not going back to the same economy that we knew in 2019. Some of the changes will be profound and lasting. Manufacturing and supply chains will need to become more resilient, more local, and more technologically advanced.
And then focus shifted to Africa's tech-savvy youth who provide tech hubs across the continent and empower youths with skills for future work.
The work we have to do as Africans ourselves is we have to believe we're equal. First, before we demand it of the world, we have to recognize that even though I might come from the south and you from the west and somebody else from the east, and we might deal with partners from all over the world, we are equal to them. That we are not just recipients of donor capital, and that it's not just donations that we need, but it's determination to build a better future.
Let's bring in Chief Executive Officer, Cowrie Asset Management Limited, Johnson Chukwu. Mr. Chukwu, thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you, Amarachi, for having me.
This will not be the first forum on Africa, but it is the first post-COVID. How well do you think African economies have fared during the pandemic?
My take is that apart from the lockdown that occurred across the African economies, just as it happened everywhere else in the world, in terms of the health impact of COVID, I don't think it was as severe as many other regions of the world. Obviously, because of the demography of Africa. As you may know, the average life expectancy for men in Africa is about 63 years, and that of women is about 66 years, which means the African population is largely young, and COVID mostly devastated countries where they have very aged population. So in terms of impact of COVID on the African continent, I don't think it was as severe as it relates to the health impact. On the economic impact, because it led to collapse of commodity prices, so we found a lot of African economies couldn't balance their fiscal framework. So it had a direct impact on ability of African economies to meet their financial obligations. Beyond that, it's also because African countries were already weak in terms of income per capita. So it further worsened the level of poverty in Africa. But in terms of health impact, I don't think it was as severe as we had in other regions of the world.
And the Rwandan President, Paul Kagame, says the pandemic is becoming more manageable. That's something we can all believe and relate to. More countries are reopening economies, but perhaps now more than ever, Africa needs a foreign direct investment. Do you think that the continent is doing enough to attract it?
Well, I wouldn't think that the country is doing enough. But a few countries in Africa are doing a lot. So if somebody like Paul Kagame is saying that, we know Rwanda is doing a lot to attract foreign direct investment. As we speak, Rwanda is setting up an economic financial center, Kigali Financial Center, and is inviting the whole world to come and invest or have some business operations in Kigali. I was actually prospected by the agency saddled with that responsibility when I was in UK last week. So you see a few African countries really pushing to attract foreign direct investment into Africa. But unfortunately, that is not even across Africa. You have other countries that seem to have taken their sight off the ball and think they can fund their economic development from their budget allocation. So if you take the average, I would say that African countries are not doing enough to attract foreign direct investment in Africa, given the paucity of funding that we need here, given the severity of the gap that we need to fund. I think virtually all African economies should focus on the right policies that will incentivize investment in Africa. They should focus on those issues that are deterrent or keep away investors and address them, improving their ease of doing business, improving their global competitiveness. And those are factors that will attract investment. It's not just a matter of mounting it. So in terms of policies, I think that is where the weakness is as it relates to some African countries, not all African countries, but a few are really pushing.
Yeah, and everyone is looking to Africa to innovate. Everyone is looking to Nigeria to lead and to guide global investments on the continent. Do you think that we're there yet?
Well, I doubt if we are there. If you take Nigeria, for instance, I did say that a country like Rwanda is really pushing. I attended an investment forum for Africa in London last week. And at that forum, I did mention that the Rwandan government is setting up the Kigali Financial Center, had representatives there. We are pitching for investors to come to Kigali. We had Ghana that had a session to attract investment into Ghana. But obviously, in the case of Nigeria, the public sector or the government was missing. It was largely the Nigerian private sector that tried to show presence in London at that investment conference. So I think the government need to buckle up and really recognize that you just one, you have to address the factor that are keeping away investors, policy factors, issues of insecurity, and other factors. But you also need to sell your country. We see other African countries actually marketing their country, the investment opportunity in their country. I don't think we're doing enough in that direction. I think we have a long way to go to market Nigeria as an investment destination. But before we even do that, or while we're doing that, we should also address some of the challenges we have in our socio-political structures.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Nigeria was absent from that summit in London. Nigeria was also absent from this summit that held in Dubai. What sort of contribution could the Nigerian delegation have made had it been there?
Well, there's a colloquial saying that if you don't say I'm near here, nobody will know you are there, or nobody will recognize you are there. You need to announce yourself. So I feel if the government had gone there with a strong team that was going to pitch the opportunity in the Nigerian market, probably we could attract one or two investors, but most importantly, create the awareness that we are a country that is laden with opportunities for investment purposes, and obviously sell some sectors of the economy that are yearning for good investors and have good return prospects. But if you don't attend this fora, then there's no way you can present yourself before the investing public and tell them what you have. I think clearly we missed an opportunity to sell our country to the investment community.
Now, usually for fora like these, the impacts and the gains are not readily seen. But for you, as a business person, an economist, and an investor, what would you expect to be the impact of the forum on the continent?
Well, the first thing is that you create awareness about opportunities in the continent. Today, the continent is the largest single economic bloc, given the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And it simply means we have an economy, we have about 1.2 billion consumers. We have an economy that is expected to grow by more than $2 trillion in the next few years. We have a continent that has no single fully matured economic sector. So it simply means in Africa, virtually every sector of African economy present opportunities for good returns, and there's no mature sector. So clearly, what the message will be sending across, or which is what Africans are sending across, that this is the next big frontier. China has developed, India is advanced in its development. The next opportunity area, the next big frontier for investment is Africa. And investors who lose sight or turn blind eyes to the opportunity in Africa because of some of the challenges you have today will have themselves to blame in the next couple of years.
Mr. Johnson Chukwu, always a pleasure speaking with you on Diplomatic Channel. We'll be right back.
The pleasure is mine.
Coming up after the break, who's allowed in and what will be the protocols for travel into the United States from November 8th? Stay with us to find out. Welcome back to Diplomatic Channel. Come November 8th, the United States says it will be reopening its borders to fully vaccinated travelers by air, land, or passenger ferry. However, travelers will need to show proof of vaccination on arrival in the U.S., but will still need to show pre-departure negative COVID-19 tests taken within 3 days of boarding their flight. And there's more. Non-essential travelers crossing at a land border will be required to show proof of vaccination or attest to their vaccination status upon request by a border agent. But unlike air travelers, they will face no requirement to show a negative COVID-19 test. Also, by January, essential travelers crossing into the U.S. at a land border will be required to be fully vaccinated. Foreign Affairs analyst Calvin Dark joins me now for more. Calvin, great to see you. So let's just begin. A lot of people would be happy to hear this news, as many have been looking forward to visiting family and friends in the U.S. Is there really any idea how many countries travelers would be allowed to come into the U.S. and if Nigeria is making this list?
Well, I think from what we know now, because we're still waiting on some specifics from the White House, the Biden administration, it looks like they're shifting their focus away from a country-specific status, rather vaccination status. So if what we've been told so far from the Biden administration is correct, it wouldn't necessarily depend on the country someone's coming from, but on their vaccination status. Now, of course, that does depend a lot on the country because we all know that not all countries have the same level of vaccination. But I think the move is towards vaccinations, not country of origin.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, if the U.S. Donating millions of doses of COVID vaccines had anything to do with this, the confidence with which the White House is making this announcement.
I believe so, but I also believe that there's a lot of pressure on President Biden to get the economy back running. And he's run into several pitfalls from that. And one of the big components of that is international travel, be it for business or even for tourism. So I think that, yes, part of the plan was donating vaccines to other countries, but I think this is more geared towards getting the U.S. economy kind of back on track because the economic numbers aren't looking good, or at least as good as Biden had projected.
This differs, from what other countries are doing. Other countries are still reopening borders by batches. First of all, for the UK, it's people who have been vaccinated with specific types of vaccines that are being allowed into the United Kingdom, and then they're skipping some COVID protocols for them. But for the US, what does this really mean? What will the protocols entail? Because they're just saying, come in if you're fully vaccinated, show proof of vaccination. Yet people are still required to take the COVID tests before entering the United States.
Well, I think there are three quick points about that. One is we're still waiting on a lot of the details because some of the, the devil's in the details, a lot of folks are still waiting on. November, I think 8th it is not that far away. Secondly, there's a political dimension here in the United States because, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a huge debate over these vaccine mandates. And you have a lot of people who are on the side of not mandating vaccines to push COVID testing. And so I think that's partly behind the COVID testing requirement as well, because you have a lot of people in this country that's saying, well, if someone was allowed to be here without a COVID test and just taking their vaccination status, that's less stringent than what they would have to do here. The other thing is we do know that, I believe I was reading that as far as the vaccinations that will be considered will be, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna. I don't think that the Sputnik 5, I believe it is from Russia, will be allowed. So, there's probably politics behind that as well. But there's still a lot to be confirmed as we wait for the Biden administration to give us these details that we need.
But Calvin, what do you make of the restrictions, to these vaccinations? For example, I've heard some reports that if you're headed to China, you have to be vaccinated with either the Sinopharm or the Sinovac vaccine. If you're coming to the United States, if you're going to Western countries, notice how, these countries tend to favor certain vaccinations more than others. The Chinese and Russian vaccines and the ones from the other parts of the world don't seem to be in the top three when you talk about vaccinations, in the West.
Yes, like I said, I think there's a lot of politics behind that, particularly when it comes to the Russian and China vaccinations. But I also think too that these new policies, there's a bit of that political interference, but there's also trying to make a little more sense because up until now, and in fact, I think now until November 8th, there were these weird workarounds where you could come to the United States if you spent 2 weeks in Cancun in Mexico, and nobody really explained why that was supposedly safer than to come into the United States, and other workarounds that we've seen. So it's a mix of politics, a mix of preference over Western vaccines, and I think a desire to kind of get back to normal as quickly as possible.
Well, since we're on the issue of, we mentioned the Chinese vaccines, do you think that this measure also extends to travelers coming from China?
I think that will be an interesting thing. As it stands right now, from what we've been told, I don't think that the U.S. would include the Chinese vaccine in their list. However, when we think about the economic cost of that, that actually may that I mean that's what we've been told. That may not be in the final calculations because that would definitely cut into a huge number of tourists and business travelers. So I think probably that's why we didn't get all these details when President Biden announced it a couple of weeks ago, because they're now trying to see if that would even be feasible, for example, to not include the Chinese vaccine among the accepted ones.
What about the issue of reciprocity? Reciprocity in, travel protocols. If the U.S. is opening its borders to the rest of the world, do you think that the other countries should also open their borders as well?
Well, I think just for health reasons that I think each country should do what they believe is the most beneficial and helpful for their populations. And if that means restricting visitors to those who have been vaccinated, I totally support that. I'll tell you that from my personal situation and those that of a lot of my friends and colleagues, we've been apprehensive about going abroad, not because we're afraid of COVID abroad, but kind of afraid of what we would have to do to get back into our country if we're coming from certain countries, particularly on the African continent. I haven't been in it over a year and a half, and I want to go back. So I think that's one of the things that we'll have to decide. I think reciprocity would be good, but I think it's going to be difficult, particularly for non-Western countries.
And of course, a lot of diplomatic shuttle coming up. A lot of leaders missed out on the UN General Assembly being there physically because of these COVID protocols and the fact that the UN advised delegations to keep advised countries to keep their delegations small. But now and most conferences and events have been moved to next year. What is the idea here? With the more vaccinations, is it possible that normalcy could resume, normalcy as we knew it before COVID, could resume hopefully in 2022?
Well, I think from what most the medical experts here are saying is that our new normal will forever be different, but when it comes back to the level of normalcy that we're having conventions, conferences, diplomatic meetings in person, once we get through this winter, then I think we'll start to see that in the beginning of next year. What I think we need to be careful about is there's the medical community that's saying that that's possible, but then there's also this angst among people here in the U.S. and I'm sure abroad that regardless of what the medical community says, people are ready to get back to normal. And I think that's understandable. We just have to make sure that we balance that, because as much as we want to get back to normal, if we don't do it following medical advice, we might be in the same situation in a year from now.
Hopefully not, Calvin. We'd love to welcome you back in Africa sometime soon. Thanks again for speaking with me on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you.
That's it on Diplomatic Channel this week. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. You can reach me using the handle on your screen. It's on Instagram at Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.